Michael Howell has been on both sides of the table in big pharma. He's been the scientist presenting the data, and he's also been the person poking holes in someone else's. Most people in drug development live on one side or the other. Michael has spent over 2 decades doing both, from postdoc research at National Jewish to scientific leadership at Boehringer Ingelheim and AstraZeneca. He understands the biology deeply enough to build the science, and he sat through enough deal rooms to know what the person across is actually looking for. Now, as founder and president of Mountaineer Biosciences, he helps early-stage founders and investors turn strong science into programs that actually move forward. We get into how pharma deals really happen, where AI helps in drug development versus where it falls short, and what keeps Michael going, working on diseases that still don't have a real answer. Let's get into it.
This is Stories in Life Sciences, brought to you by MedAccess AI, where we explore how ideas move from discovery to real-world impact.
Dr. Howell, welcome to the show today, Stories in Life Sciences. I'm excited to dig into a few more pieces from our last conversation. Where are you calling in from today?
Calling in from San Diego, and happy to join this. Really appreciate the opportunity.
Today, I just want to get started with your journey. You've had an interesting one, from academia into big pharma, into doing your own thing in biotech and small companies and all over. But just to get started, I feel like one always interesting is that transition from academia into private, and like what spurred that for you?
Sure. So the short version of it is that while I was at National Jewish as a postdoc, we started doing a lot of engagement with pharmaceutical companies. As you can imagine, back in the early 2000s, there was still a lot of interest in steroid-resistant asthma and understanding inflammatory skin conditions. And so as part of that process, we did a lot of characterization of epithelial tissues. And through that process, there was a growing recognition that the biological world, or the armamentarium of therapeutics in that space, was going to grow. And so we partnered with companies like Novartis and Galderma and other groups along the way. And as we were doing our own independent research, we recognized that if we really wanted to make a difference within the therapeutics that were out there, then for me, I was going to have to transition from that academic world into kind of a more industrial setting. And that became really kind of foremost in my mind. We published a paper in 2005 that actually promoted the use of neutralizing antibodies against IL-4 and IL-13, which is kind of the concept behind Dupixent. We published a paper promoting that. And when we engaged with a couple of different pharmaceutical clients, they had literally gone back through and said, you know, we appreciate the academic science that you're doing, but please stay to that and let us do the drug development side of it. So it was one of those things where you come out of it at the back end and go, all right, well, if I really want to do this, then I need to make a leap. And so I did.
And then that transition, where was that?
Sure. So I transitioned from being a faculty member at National Jewish into a principal scientist role at Boehringer Ingelheim. So again, moved from the Rocky Mountains, where I had a beautiful view of those mountains, which is part of the kind of mechanism behind Mountaineer, but moved from there to Ridgefield, Connecticut, and took over as one of the leads for a number of different projects that they were working at the time. And some of those included, that most people are familiar with, was one of the scientists on a drug that's now called Skyrizi. So we did a lot of the preclinical characterization of that therapeutic. I'm one of the co-inventors for Spezolimab, the IL-36 receptor monoclonal antibody. We did all the characterization of that, brought it actually to the clinic, and ultimately outlined what the path forward was going to look like for those patients. And so that was kind of the first foray into the industrial world and learning the ropes, as you would say, of trying to understand how do you more definitively go through that drug targeting environment or research and development with an end product in mind.
And what was that transition like for you?
It was a bit challenging.
Yeah.
I love to tell people I'm self-diagnosed with ADHD, so I love having multiple programs at any given time, just because it allows you, science can be frustrating at times. The joke that I say to people is, listen, there's a reason why it's called research and not just search. It's because we have to go back and do it again. So, through that entire process, if you have one single program, you end up finding yourself frustrated at times and immediately adjusting to, well, now I have 4 or 5 programs that we're trying to work on and manage and, taking from point A to point B. It gives you some degree of flexibility so that if you're having a bad day with one of those experiments or with one of those programs, take a break from it, go work on one of the other programs and then come back. And it really kind of helped me understand the fluid nature of drug development and being able to actually move programs from kind of one stage to the next.
Anything that really was a surprise for you in it? Like maybe something that you liked, didn't like, that you just didn't expect, or?
I love high pressure environments, quite honestly. So for me, it was a natural kind of transition on that side of it. But for a lot of people going from the free academic, I'm here to pontificate and understand and really dive into the greater meaning of everything, to a listen, our goal is to ultimately develop a therapeutic that we can launch on the commercial side of it, to yes, improve the quality of life for patients, but obviously also to be able to facilitate R&D in some other capacity. The part that I've learned through the years from industry has nothing to do with science. It has to do with, what's the process involved in all of this? How do we understand what the overall unmet need is for the patient population, to the point where we can really gravitate and get there, and then ultimately leading to the commercialization. So that was a complete surprise to me. I fully anticipated being able to carry that academic mindset into everything I was doing within industry, and they quickly put a halt to that and trained me on how to do things differently.
Did it surprise you that you liked it?
A little bit, quite honestly. I've had a lot of friends who've gone back and forth within academic and the industry lifestyles and kind of their meaning for it. From my perspective, once I went into it and I recognized that there was this ability to diversify what I was trying to investigate at any given time, it actually appealed to me. Because again, there are days that you walk into the lab and you've had a really bad experiment, or one of your in vivo studies didn't go the way that you planned, and you have to go back to square one and thinking through it. And this was all right, well, this is a temporary kind of road bump or speed bump, and I've got another program that's accelerating along the path. Let me dedicate a little bit of time to there. And in the back of my mind, I'll just continue to think about how do we improve this overall program. And it worked out well. I haven't looked back since.
Yeah, I could see how self-diagnosed ADHD, that would be more enjoyable for me too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and then after that transition into big pharma, then what was next?
Ultimately wanted to make more and more of a difference. And, I went from a lab that we had in Denver that was at its highest point was, 15 to 20 people, to jumping into Beringer, where Beringer's, 50 to 60,000 people globally. And you're participating in one of the programs that's there. And so I wanted to play more and more of an active role in the strategic development of programs and identifying what are the indications we want to go after beyond just an initial core. Is there an expansion that we could do? Transitioning more from a discovery scientist into a translationally driven individual, where you can play on both sides, on the early discovery and also on the early clinical development side of it, and bring the whole thing together. That became kind of my sweet spot, so to speak, of being able to go through and understand human biology and really diving as much as I could into the human biology and then using that to inform everything else.
Yeah, I feel like that's a unique combination to have, the scientist background, but also enjoying the business aspect or commercialization side of it too, which is a unique talent. And then where does that lead to then to where you're at now with Mountaineer and what you're up to there?
Obviously, after Boehringer Ingelheim, had worked at another company, AstraZeneca and MedImmune, where we were developing therapeutics in the and I was focusing on the translational. That actually facilitated a little bit of that business development. So in the process of developing some of the therapeutics we were working on, we looked at out licensing them. And so I got to be one of the core members of that diligence team that was presenting to other companies and engaging with them in that entire process. And so that was a complete eye-opening experience for me to see how deals were actually made in pharma. And then from there was able to go through and at Insight, when I transitioned from MedImmune to Insight was looking at, doing a pivot within their organization, transitioning away from a complete and total focus on hematologic diseases and oncology into consideration of non-oncology or inflammation at the time. And, was one of the initial members that came in to help build that out in the mid-teens, 20 teens. And ultimately, over the next 4 years, we set the tone for what's now determined to be called Insight Dermatology, with a number of therapies that advanced through that entire process. And, as a follow-on to that, was invited to join a number of different advisory boards based on the contributions we've made to the success of those programs, and then ultimately served as a CSO for 2 publicly traded companies. And through that entire process, again, what I learned is that there are key components on the scientific side of it that are the foundation for everything we do. And then there's the component that is how do you bridge that science with the commercial landscape and make sure that they merge together in some capacity rather than existing in sole, silos or isolation from one another. And ultimately, when I stepped down at Zura, it was to come in and really think about how do we partner with some of these groups and build new companies? How can I leverage the expertise and experiences that I've built over the last 15 years or so, 20 years, to be able to go through and help other companies that are in that stage to come, hopefully achieve a greater success? And that's really where Mountaineer fits right now. So we've partnered with investment banks, venture firms, publicly traded and even privately held companies to do strategic reviews of their entire pipeline, outline opportunities for transitions on the scientific, translational, or even in some cases the clinical side of it, to make better decisions about what are the places that they should actually focus, and then refine their strategy as they're ultimately bringing those therapeutics forward. And it's been a whirlwind, to say the least.
Yeah.
We've been very fortunate, and over the last 18 months have participated in some capacity in the formation of 6 new companies.
Wow. It shows how much that was needed, like that missing gap there of that early stage science to like the commercialization aspect of it. And it seems like you found, when you said that intro you had, you found out how the deals were made in pharma. Like, how are the deals made in pharma? like my background's mostly med tech and a little bit of pharma, but I haven't touched on like big pharma. I'm just curious, how are those deals?
There's a lot of meetings. It's really entertaining because the scientific academic side of me, and the way that I describe myself and sometimes is as a recovering academic, there's still part of my brain that goes back to that, where I think, well, this is just fundamental science. This is easy. We should be able to plan off of this. Why are we making things so complicated? Ultimately, what was interesting with the business development side of it was learning how other companies view your data. So you may come through and think that you have the world's best data, and then you suddenly hear somebody come through and start scrutinizing or asking questions related to it, and they poke the holes through it. And so suddenly you realize, all right, well, there's a lot I still need to learn. It's not a negative. At least I didn't take it as a negative. I took it as there are places that I need to improve to help bring forward the best drugs that I possibly can. And so that mindset then carries through as you're starting to do novel drug development on your own, or you're evaluating as part of a due diligence for somebody else. These are the questions I've come up with because of my past experiences, and I had those same types of questions. Then ultimately it gets handed over to a bunch of financial gurus, and they withdraw the scientists from the conversation and they start the conversation about finances, which is usually pretty smart at that point.
Yeah, you guys could leave now. That changes things. I feel like from what I see, people that I talk to and here too, if they're scientists developing a drug for the first time, they don't have that frame of reference for how a commercial type person is going to, what questions they're going to ask, or how they're going to look at that. Or so what would you say to that? Like if you are starting out in biotech and creating a drug, like how to think about that, or how do you help companies now think about that?
Most of the people are familiar with a tiny street in San Francisco called Lombard Street. It's one of the curviest streets in the entire world. And that's typically how most scientists approach their problems. Here's an issue. Let me wind back and forth, trying to understand as much as I can. And within drug development, instead, it's the straightest point. So how do I start at the top of Lombard Street, and what's the fastest path to get me to the bottom? And quite honestly, it's actually the sidewalk because it goes straight. And so that helps you put into perspective, how do I get from point A to point B without all these little side things coming through? That's the guidance that we provide. So when you sit down, there's a clear path to characterization of your drug so that you can understand really what is the mechanism of action and why that's important, so that it informs the decision making that you have for what indications to go after. And then based on those indications, there's an entire regulatory strategy that goes along with it. And so a lot of those things can be handled very quickly to really do it in a delineated fashion and a pragmatic manner. That way you can actually get to those answers as quickly as possible. And that's a complete divergence from what we're all taught in academia, which is, well, if there's a little question over here, let's go after it. Let's try to pursue that. And, the difference is you're dealing with a certain amount or a finite amount of time to actually do your drug development, and a finite amount of money, quite honestly. There, you want to be incentivized to do that as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I could see that definitely being a shift from the academic environment out to the world where finances and money are one of the driving factors. But it is important, I feel like, to understand, because in the end, I feel like to your point, why you maybe left academia is you wanted to bring some of these therapeutics out into the world. And one of the things that I was reading before we got into this, intriguing to me, was you're an immunologist by background, and some of the drug you found. This is correct me if I totally butchered this, but like the suppression of some disease states from a like immunology standpoint, and you looking at kind of playing what I think about as in a different sandbox of like, how do we actually reset the immune system potentially, and not just look at suppressing some of those things that happen. And if that is true, and just what draws you to, I guess, maybe looking at things differently, and how you're more intrigued in that than maybe doing what everyone else is doing.
It's really interesting. So some of the scariest words I ever hear at companies is when they say, well, this is the way that we've always done it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the words that immediately triggers me to go through and say, well, let's do it a different way. One of the other adages that came through when I was a postdoc, my mentor at the time came through, and he made probably one of the greatest pieces of wisdom that I've ever had in my career. He said, if you think that you're intelligent and the only person who's coming up with an idea, just realize there's at least 40 other people with the same idea saying the same thing. And so it's a differentiation. If you think through the entire strategy of what most companies are trying to do from their own drug development side of it, where can you be creative? There's a level of calculated risk and reward that goes into everything we ever do as humans, and ultimately within the drug development world as well. Part of that comes down to how well do you understand the biology of the diseases you're studying? And are there key factors that you can capitalize on where others have just shied away from? So for example, we've spent, 2 decades really going through and perfecting our way of B-cell depletion in a number of different capacities. And it's only in the last several years that we're really starting to explore T-cell depletion strategies as well. Part of that's just because our understanding of biology has emerged a bit. We're now leveraging technological advances to think about how do we do directed therapies. There was a concept we promoted a couple of years ago, actually to a venture group that I won't say, where we promoted the idea of taking lipid nanoparticles and encapsulating something on the surface to direct the therapies. And we were told at the time it's a little too nuanced for us. And we've now seen multiple therapeutic companies go forward with that same strategy and with successful exits. And so there's a degree of risk and reward, and also just timing of being in the right place at the right time and holding on to some of those thoughts in the background so that you can capitalize on those ideas as soon as somebody else comes up with them as well, which is kind of a weird way to think about it.
Yeah. And so speaking of advances, just coming back from JPM, a few months ago, obviously a lot of conversation about AI and drug development and the uses for that. Within that space, like what scares you, or what do you think is, hype that you see with companies coming in, and what excites you about it in terms of the future and how that relates to drug development?
Obviously we've gone from as a community from well, maybe I should toy with ChatGPT or something like that, to now where we've got companies that are leveraging similar types of algorithms and platforms to enable, enhanced drug development skills based on whatever's in the literature landscape and from the chemical structures that we understand. The scary part to me is the data that we're using for a lot of this obviously comes from a variety of research centers and research facilities throughout the entire globe. And in some cases, it's difficult to repeat those types of experiments. So obviously, there's some fallibility that goes along with those data that we just need to keep in mind. Ultimately, at the end of the day, the way that I view AI in general is that you still need the right people putting in the prompt. So for the most part, AI is still dependent on what question you're asking. And if you were to ask a question and it was slightly different from the way that I ask a question, are we going to get the same answer? I could say, quite honestly, from the individual devices that we all have at home, if we were to ask either our phones or the other device that sits in most of our houses, if we ask different questions or the same question slightly differently based on my own personal experience, you get completely different answers.
Yeah.
So I think the part that I think we're going to evolve as a community over time is understanding what are the right questions and how do we phrase those questions so that we get the most meaningful answers.
Yeah, it's so true. I feel like it's like learning a new language, like the prompting, like, and the different ones are all different too. You speak to Claude this way, you speak to Chat this way, you get a different prompt too. Like all the models are trained differently. So it is so key. And I'm sure if you ask your wife's Chat GPT or you ask yours, it probably, in my experience, it says something very different. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, as far as the feedback, you work with these early stage companies. Can you just tell, like, when they have some BS that's based on like they've developed something that comes from, and how do you see through holes in that, or if that is things that you see?
In some cases, yes, you can see.
Yeah.
And you make the decision yourself as to how much you can actually guide them through there. And there are different levels of quality in understanding the actual programming languages. I by no means do I ever profess to be proficient at any sort of AI ML approach. That's why I call friends of mine. But you can very quickly tell, depending on the leverage that they place on the public databases and kind of the interpretations that come out of it. So is there already a inherent scrutiny that they built into this? Are they using it for novel target identification? Are they using it for enhanced, chemical design? So compound structures where they leverage the, ChemMab, other programs that are out there that will actually inform them what's worked from a clinical perspective in terms of the data. And when they've done the enzymatic assays and it's all built into the database, can you learn from that? Antibody structures, same things. It's so if you walk in and you see somebody who says, I would like to use AI to find a drug,
Yeah.
then you got a problem. If they're using it to refine their strategies and saying, I'd like to understand, why is my antibody binding to this amino acid and not to this amino acid, and how do I change it so that I get certain criteria, that's a bit more focused and nuanced, and they typically have a better understanding of it to be able to guide their strategic imperatives as they go forward.
I like that. I like that. That's one thing I took from a speaker that I saw. I was actually at JPM. He said it treated as a creative co-pilot.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that. It feels like what you're speaking to. It's a solid creative
Absolutely.
co-pilot. It's not driving the plane or flying the plane that's going to get us in trouble. What excites you about what type of like new drugs or things that can be developed? Like that's what I see is like how much faster can it get things to market potentially, both like from a drug development, but also just infusing in the business or things that you're speaking to. I feel like connecting different people with capital, with resources, with CROs. Like, how do you see it being infused? What excites you about it?
One of the parts that I really think is an advantage of this is combinatorial approaches. And the reason why I say this is we've gone through and through the years have leveraged our understanding of biology to realize that humans are incredibly complex. Yeah. No shock to anybody that's going to be on listening to the podcast or anybody else that's out there. But we are incredibly heterogeneous individuals. And so a one size fits all is never going to work. There are situations where we see an improved benefit, but ultimately in order to target, and human biology is also incredibly redundant. So the way in which our bodies work, there's, one mechanism, if you shut it down, there's other mechanisms that often take its place. What we've learned through this process is that complex biology needs to be addressed in a complex manner. And we don't think that way. So our human order systems don't necessarily contemplate all the iterations that might be potentially beneficial. And so one of the things that I find value in is if I can leverage the artificial intelligence and kind of the signatures and algorithms that are out there to say, this is a pathway that's incredibly active in this individual or these sets of individuals. And then here's another pathway that we find is incredibly elevated in this other set of individuals. Maybe this is an opportunity either for co-administration, co-formulation, or novel therapeutic approaches, whether they be bispecifics, trispecifics, multispecifics, whatever you want to call, or antibody drug conjugates, or T-cell engagers, etc. And I think that our growing understanding with this entire approach has actually outlined a number of these novel modalities that are, gaining more and more momentum as we start to realize what the true therapeutic benefit is for each one of them. That's the part that I think is incredibly exciting, is that we've gone from here's a small molecule, it's going to fit there. We hope it works. Here's an antibody, it's going to go there. We know that it's going to hit it because it's far more targeted, but maybe it's not enough to cover the broad spectrum of inflammation. So how do we think? And now we've got all these different modalities that have come out in the last decade that are really pushing us into a completely new era for therapeutic development.
Oh, that's exciting to me. On that note, why this? I mean, there's so many other things to do that are so much easier, like especially to make money or to do for a living. I mean, what drew you into this in the beginning, and why still? What excites you about it still?
I loved problem solving. At one point in time, thought I was going to be an engineer. Ended up going through and I saw a very close family friend or family member come down with bone cancer. And when I went into the physicians, while they were having their doctor's visits and started to understand a little bit more behind what was going on within the disease, it transitioned me from thinking, well, maybe I want to be a physician into to you know what, I really want to understand, how do I solve all the problems? And that's what keeps me awake at night, is that there are people suffering from diseases. And so honestly, that's what threw me into it. I pivoted a little bit when I was looking at colleges and trying to understand what degrees did I need to do. And that's actually what pushed me into immunology, as opposed to some of the other kind of indications or kind of specialties. I really wanted to understand the human immune system to be able to think about, how do we solve those complex issues? Believe it or not, the question that my family members have even asked me through the years is, why wouldn't you do something else? Why wouldn't you leverage this? We know friends of ours who got their medical degree and then went into finance industry. And they're like, why didn't you do that? And I said, because I like the challenge. I love the challenge of being able to go through and say, here's an issue that people have struggled with. Now let me put my mind to it along with people that we trust, and let's figure out if we can find a solution. The old adage used to be, for a variety of people, there's almost the entire world is a bunch of kind of individuals who identify problems. I wanted to be one of the people who solves them.
I like that. I'm glad there's people like you out there that are working, that are still inspired to solve problems. But in the immunology specifically, what was it about that you felt?
To me, and again, very centric, because obviously I'm a little bit biased on this.
Yeah.
I believe that the immune system is centered to everything. Obviously, there's a tumor microenvironment, which depends a little bit on what's going on within the human immune system and how we actually treat ourselves. We've seen within the epithelial disorders, severe asthma, COPD, IPF, things that we do to our body have a kind of a deleterious effect in some capacities, whether it's pollutants or smoking or things along those lines. And it's all of this and how it, from a complexity standpoint, interacts from the larger system that leads to some of these diseases. And so are there simple things we can do? Is there low-hanging fruit that we can identify that allows us to make lifestyle changes, for example, in patients who are at the early stages that ultimately will improve their life? Or is it, individuals like myself that have eaten way too many Twizzlers through my entire lifetime, and in order to make sure I get the right amount of antioxidants, I've got to ramp it up in some capacity. Just eating a blueberry or two is not going to help me. So I've got to figure out how to actually treat myself. But it's in reality, I think that immunology, whether it's, on the oncology side, inflammation side, or autoimmune side, I think all of it is just this spectrum of things going back and forth and really understanding how do we function as humans and getting it to a neutral or homeostatic environment as much as we can. And so that's always been interesting to try and pursue.
Yeah, that is interesting to me too. You're a Twizzler guy. My dad's a Twizzler guy. I'm not a fan, man.
Oh my God. If you're ever traveling, doesn't melt. So no matter what it is, the temperature, whether you're in Phoenix, Arizona, or you're in, Canada somewhere where at the very north Arctic Circle sometime, it's still going to be a Twizzler. It's not going to be a Snickers bar that's going to melt into a little mess that you have to.
So I guess there's two different perspectives on this. So you're a science guy. There's a reason why it also doesn't melt because of what it is and how it can last forever.
It's fine. All of us have ingested enough preservative. No, it's honestly, it's one of those things where when I started traveling a bit for different presentations and conferences, and at one point in time found myself traveling almost several weeks straight, and you're trying to figure out what do you pack in your bag that you can actually eat when you're running from either one meeting to another meeting. And you ultimately come down to like trail mix, or you come down with something that's not going to melt. And the first time I did Twizzlers, I thought, holy crap, this actually worked.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes some more sense now. I have been on the road like that before, and you gotta find a few things that you can keep with you out there on the road, man. I don't miss those days at all, in any way, shape, or form. On the immunology side, there was something that I read about, like you have the ability or researching to kind of reset. When you spoke about T cells earlier, how do you reset it without destroying it? Like is that, am I reading that correctly in terms of the possibility of that, as opposed to just, treating the symptoms of that? Can we really do that?
That is the ultimate goal. So there are certain diseases that we've gone through and spent years trying to understand in a much deeper capacity. And so when you start to look at what are the driving factors, or what are the cells that are driving the disease pathogenesis, where you get the perpetuation of the disease. And there are things that we've learned through that process. At one point in time, I was part of the Immune Tolerance Network, where that's part of the entire goal, is to figure out how do we reset the immune system so that instead of just addressing some of the symptoms, we could actually reset the human immune system to be able to get rid of the disease as a whole. And believe it or not, one of the trials that I go back to, they actually ran a trial where they did hematopoietic stem cell transplantation in patients with relapsing remitting multiple sclerosis. And they found that in a portion of those patients, it essentially functioned like a cure, where they no longer had any relapses and they were symptom free for a extended period of time. And so what that really does is it prompts you to start thinking about, are there ways to, use combinatorial treatments to think about, could I, eliminate B cells, for example, in somebody who has an autoantibody condition? And then because autoantibodies don't just naturally occur on their own, you end up with multiple cell types that are interacting. Can I go through and reduce the antibodies and then come back through and address the cellular type that's actually driving that disease pathogenesis in hopes that it resets it to some degree? And a lot of these are, at the time, they're hypothetical based on our understanding of the disease. And we've seen some degrees of success through these combinatorial approaches. Obviously, there's a much larger studies that need to happen in those cases. But, when you look back 15, 20 years ago, where we were from a technological understanding of the human body, publishing of the human genome, and now here we are talking about proteomes and other things that are coming through epigenetic modifications, I think as our understanding continues to grow, the ability to get to that kind of resetting phase is potentially closer and closer.
That's exciting. That's wild. That's a potential to come up with. I could see that could be a driving factor to keep working on something.
Well, think about it. Years ago, when we would think about gene therapy, the likelihood of that being able to go forward, if you'd have told individuals 30 years ago that we'd be using mRNA vaccines in the midst of a pandemic to administer protection to individuals, they probably would have laughed at you. It's things that have changed dramatically as we've grown in our understanding of not only the human body and the human immune system, but also as there's been technological advances that allow us to go through and manipulate those systems to a much greater degree. Safely.
Yeah. That's a good final part. And what about now? What are you up to at Mountaineer that you're really excited about? What does the future look like?
The future is wide open.
You want to actually just start back with dig into a little bit more what exactly at Mountaineer that you all do? Yeah.
Mountaineer was initially established several years ago. During the middle of COVID-19, we started getting questions from individuals asking for immunological kind of understandings. What's happening to the human body? Could we go through and provide some level of understanding of the inflammation that's actually developing? Ultimately, with the number of requests, realized that we needed to go through and establish a kind of a backbone, which was the initial foundation for Mountaineer. When I left Zura, we started connecting with other groups that were really looking on the investment front and trying to figure out, could we do due diligence? Are there therapeutics that are out there that we could review, helping them as they were actually building their own companies? And through a, kind of an understanding, so we would, look at an asset that was being reviewed by a particular company for investing, we'd provide feedback, and then ultimately go on to the next group and next group and next group. As we established a rapport with a number of these different venture firms and investment banks, they realized we had some of our own ideas. And so in one case, one of the venture firms sat down and said, if you could build anything, what would you build? And so we did. And that company is still in stealth mode right now. They were successfully funded. And hopefully I'll be able to share the name at some point in the next several months as they kind of emerge from stealth. But we stepped into those kinds of realms where people that we had known throughout the entire drug development industry were looking at expanding out their pipeline or spinning off a new company, and they weren't sure how to do it. And so Mountaineer really, again, I've been very, very fortunate with my career to be part of the academic side, the true research and development discovery side of it, the translational components leading up to it, have written a number of clinical protocols along the way as well, and then participated in commercial launches. So from essentially A to B, we've done some degree of almost everything within drug development. Obviously, there's some missing pieces, so they can criticize me. But we've done enough to be able to understand kind of the criteria of getting things from point A to point B. And so there's a lot of companies that are in that phase of, I have an idea, now what?
Yeah.
Or we have an initial compound I identified in a lab, now what do I do? So we step in to guide them through this entire process. And in a number of instances, we've been pulled in as co-founders of the companies to really help them build out their strategy and to build out their science. Other groups were pulled in as scientific advisory board members to help guide them through that process as well from kind of a more supervisory point of view and make sure that they're, looking in the right capacity or in the right manner. And then in some cases as well, we're functioning in the business development side, making connections between companies who we know from the other side that are looking for assets or looking for ideas, and just trying to serve as a benefactor for the whole scientific community.
That sounds like so much fun.
It's as you can imagine, over the last several years with the number of companies that are coming through, and it's by no means, we don't have, every answer, but the goal is to try and find groups that are willing to share their ideas as well. And then we partner with them through that entire process. Thinking about how do you build the next generation, or what does it look like from here? If everybody else, for example, is in this space and you have something that's kind of in that space as well, do you really want to put all your eggs there? Or do you want to do something completely creative and go somewhere different? We get to challenge all those hypotheses. We've worked with publicly traded companies and private companies to help them reevaluate their entire pipelines, to provide strategic review of where we think they should go, making connections to, different groups that can actually make those therapeutics for them. It's really been a very interesting process.
Yeah, like an ecosystem connector.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that actually has the experience on both sides of the equation, the leverage and all that experience over time. This came up when I talked to you last time, and you said it right here. You had a VC that said, you can create whatever you want.
Yeah.
That looks at you. For one, what does that feel like? I don't even know what would be going through my mind. But did you immediately know, like, oh, I know exactly what I would do, or do you have to think about it?
I always have ideas in the back of my head, and I have notebooks laying around where I write down a lot of the ideas, and some of them are half-baked, where clearly there's some thought and rationale behind it, but maybe it needs a little bit more percolation to get to where it really needs to be.
Yeah.
Other ideas are this is a completely wild shot in the dark. The thought process I go through it is, within the oncology world, there used to be the idea of the moonshot programs. And so if you were to go through and look even broader in immunological setting, what would be a moonshot? And some of those concepts, and what I look back on over, 20 something years, if not longer, of being within science as a whole, and seeing a number of disorders and patients who were coming through all of our practices that we were connected with, seeing who's still suffering. That was kind of the guiding factor. If we understood the biology of those diseases, which we do to a greater degree, we don't fully understand them. Otherwise, we'd have cures for everything. There's still unmet needs that are out there. And so it's always been in the back of my mind. Like, if you could go through, and Mike, if you were asked a question, what would you combine together? And it was like this with this. And if you think about these programs as like Lego bricks, like you start to build these programs back and forth, and suddenly you're like, oh, well, that makes total sense. Let's do that. And that was kind of what it was like. It was sitting down with a couple of key individuals within their VC as well, and saying, well, what if we did this? What would be the pushback? How could we build? What's the expansion plan look like? Is there enough of an opportunity? Okay, there is. Great. Now let's do number 2. What's another unmet need that we can actually address? Where are people going and where are they leaving a gap? Most of us, when we've built a company or when you've done things through the years, you do what's called a gap analysis. We have companies like Deloitte and McKinsey and a number of others that actually do this for us on the large pharma side of it. And so I took my own idea and went, well, what's the gap analysis? If you could actually look at a couple of key indications that are out there where there's still a significant unmet need, what do you think would change the needle for them? What do you think is going to lead to a potential improvement? It doesn't have to be perfect, but you need to be willing to take the chance. And so we outlined it. It was, and to answer your other question of what did it feel like? I was taken back.
Yeah.
I thought they were joking, quite honestly, at first. The concept that came back was, no, we're not joking. We think it's time to start thinking about, what are some of the other areas that most people are not going into that we might be able to do, and see how it works.
That's cool to see that capital is thinking like that.
Mm-hmm. And it's, I mean, we're not talking like it wasn't $100 million raise, but it was enough for them to go through and start to experiment. And, the programs right now are actually moving in a very positive manner. I'm still involved as an advisor for that company and as a co-founder for it. And we're looking to see, obviously, the significant impact that those therapeutics are going to have on patients who are suffering with those diseases.
Yeah. And that's also just so good to hear too, that was what came up in your mind. Like, what problem can we solve still, and who's suffering out there, and how can we do that? And I just to kind of wrap up here, how can people find you?
Sure. So we're online, mountaineerbiosciences.com.
Okay.
If you have questions that are coming through, by all means, either reach out to me on LinkedIn. honestly, the part that I love engaging with people. So the real reason behind all of this is that you're never going to solve the answer by yourself.
Yeah.
And so it's important to make sure that you collaborate with the right people. And even now, like, I'm a firm believer, and this is kind of ways I say I'm a recovering academic. I love collaborating with people. I love partnering with people, learning from them, having them learn from me through this entire process, and figuring out that at some point in time, the therapies that we're developing might be for ourselves. How do we train the next generation to improve the overall drug discovery and kind of research and development processes that are out there so that we can continue to improve the quality of drugs that are being made available for every patient that needs them?
A bit of advice from someone leaving that academic environment or has an idea that they're thinking about to commercialization.
Caffeine is your friend. It's honestly, just realize that life is full of ups and downs. And so don't get discouraged through the entire process. Find the right people. So if you are an academic that's looking at making that transition, find the right people to partner with. Find a mentor. I have been very fortunate again to have some amazing mentors throughout my entire career that have helped me refine my strategy as we've gone through this. That is probably first and foremost because it'll influence your decision-making process as you go forward. Number two is, again, don't get frustrated to the point where you want to give up. If you're ever to that level, call me. We've had horrific failures and other things that we've done. We've also had phenomenal successes. Not everything is going to be a success. And so it's balancing out the wins and losses and realizing that at the end of the day, the win is a life-changing therapeutic for millions of individuals. Your success in that part is going to completely change the life of individuals. And so it's worth the battle. And again, I just reiterate, if you're struggling with it, call me. I'm happy to have a conversation to figure out how do we help you move forward.
Yeah, and some people say that. I really feel like you mean it, which it's partly I feel like why I wanted to talk to you again. It's just like I feel like it's genuine, like you're serious.
I love mentorship. I love being able to go through and work with, individuals that are peers or the next generation and utilize our experiences to help guide them in some capacity. And it's not that I have all the answers because I don't. I clearly don't. But if there's things that we can learn, I'm going to come back to something I said at the very beginning. The scariest words I ever hear at an organization is, well, that's the way we've always done it. Yeah. And the reason why that's scary is I had a summer intern at one point in time who came through and asked at one point, why? The group spent about an hour trying to explain to them that that's why they'd always done it. And the intern went through and said, well, there's an easier way. And immediately that's where you start recognizing that there are people who are innovative that are out there that just need the right platform to express themselves to be able to move things forward. And that's why I like mentorship, is I love finding those crazy individuals who are like, I'd like to take a chance. Awesome. Let's have a conversation. And that's where I like to start.
Yes, me too. Oh, that's why I couldn't exist in the big corporate environments anymore. I'm sure maybe, you couldn't either. It's hard to be the one that raises your hand in those spaces that looks and wants to change things. So yeah, Mike, it was so great. Really appreciated the conversation and learning more about the journey. And I'm just glad to know that you're out there helping some of these young scientists and entrepreneurs get more life-changing therapeutics out there on the market. And it's not just about money. Obviously, it's about other things and making things better out there for people. So just thank you for what you're doing. I really appreciate your time today. And for anybody who wants some help, call him. Yeah, I'm excited to see what's next and once this stealth mode thing gets out that you're talking about, and to learn more about what it is that you created when someone handed you a blank check, so to speak. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, look forward to keeping in touch.
I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for the questions. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. You've been listening to Stories in Life Sciences, sponsored by MedAccess AI, where we explore people, ideas, and breakthroughs shaping the future of biotech and healthcare innovation. To learn more, visit medaccessai.org and subscribe on YouTube to watch the full conversations and new episodes as they launch. I'm Christopher Wilson. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, keep shaping the future one story at a time.